Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to After Dark, presented by Monster Energy. Today, I'm joined by our main healer on the roster, AutomaticJak.
Hey, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Tonight, we're talking about healers.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We were missing a healer on the desk, so...
That's right. Hey, a healer, a power infusion, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess for this segment, I've played DPS for progression a lot, so I think of the game just very DPS centric. I'm not in a way where I'm just like, heal me, one heal please.
Oh sure. Yeah.
I'm very kind to the healers, but just in like how I approach things and how I look at the game, it's all like through the DPS mindset. So I just kind of want to pick your brain and see how a healer will approach new things, whether it be progression rating, farm rating, pushing keys, or like going into a dungeon for the first time or a boss the first time.
Yeah, let's get into
good?
it.
All right. So yeah, I think, so for the DPS, you're kind of like very priority list focused, where you just go like, how many nameplates are there? This is your priority list, right? Like, this is a 2 target, so that your priority list for 2 targets are different and your talents are different. And then 4 targets, then 1 target, and so on. Is there is an analog for healers for that?
I think a lot of it in general comes down to the composition you want to run for a fight. When you look at what encounters are bringing you, and we're seeing it right now on Razageth, where mobility is a primary factor into the mix. Usually that sort of analog, I think, is described as utility, output, and then survivability, movement, whatever the fight is really going to bring for you. And Razageth is very unique in that it kind of throws that out the window from the very beginning, and that mobility is so supremely important. Now, when we're looking at this fight, you just need to be able to stay on the platform or have somebody else carry you, instead of the usual factors of like absorbs, damage reduction, and the like.
Yeah, so basically, like, can you pass the pass-fail mechanics first, and then maybe see like what the damage output of the fight is?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so I guess let's just break down, like give a quick rundown of like each healer and like what they're good at.
Okay.
I guess we start with Preservation, the new guy.
Yeah, so Preservation, and you want to focus on this on rating in particular?
Yeah, rating, maybe like one word or like one little thing about a dungeon or something.
Sure. So like Preservation Evoker right now in raids is really great because that mobility factor on Razageth, but in general because it's preemptive healing and it's a lot of like combo gameplay that you have. You're able to use a few different abilities. One of them is more or less Echo to replicate a lot of your other cooldowns, and it basically allows you to set up for a lot of output, and when your group is planning around it, you can just pump healing like mad. That's really where Preservation Evoker lives and dies, is like output. And we've seen, a number of times over the years where certain healers just kind of live and die by doing lots of healing, and it varies tier by tier. Their raid-wide utility is like kind of mid, in that it's more of like a personal, or it's tougher to plan, but it really shines because it does crazy amounts of output. It can deal damage in a very focused environment. In dungeons, I would argue it has tremendous utility, and it's a very high-end healer, and it does a great job of sustaining high output over long periods of time because it has so many of these short cooldowns.
Okay. All right, and let's go to maybe the opposite end of the spectrum right now, which I think is Resto Shaman, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, Resto Shaman, and again, this goes back to where you sort of live and die by either your utility or your output. And so Resto Shaman, when it comes to a lot of these encounters that we're facing, specifically in Vault of the Incarnates, is like okay when it comes to Spirit Link. It has some good value on fights like Taros, where you can stay stacked up for long periods of time. And then it has other encounters like Dathia, where you are spread to the 4 winds very consistently. And so you could have, Slink being used on the platforms where everyone can stack. But on the other hand, you don't have the crazy burst output that we were seeing out of the Preservation Evoker being brought upstairs. And I believe it was also a Resto Druid that we saw Liquid utilizing, going upstairs, popping all their cooldowns, and healing everybody alone, when in an ordinary like guild environment, I think what you're going to see from like the next rung of guilds is they might like 5 heal the encounter if they feel comfortable with it, and just like bring 2 healers up on one of the platforms, keep people safe. The problem with Shaman is their utility doesn't mesh really well with the raid. and their output is kind of mid.
Okay. I'm trying to think. So a DPS analog, I guess for preservation is probably just devastation. You got it because they're just so similar. And shaman, I'm trying to think of what a DPS is that like only is like stacked AoE. That's just a lot of them.
Is Shadow Priest similar to that since they're only like single target?
Possibly. I'm not
I'm
sure
not sure
how
with
Shadow
Shadow.
Priests are now, right? Yeah.
Full disclosure, I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe like a hunter.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess male. And then Holy Priest, I'm going to go with like a boomkin. Like they just blanket everything. Am I correct in this assessment or?
They're very steady in their output, yeah. They
Okay.
they have access to 2 raid cooldowns, which is often a little extra layer of utility that they can bring. Symbol of Hope is great for resetting defensives, and they're just increasingly flexible for everything. They can kind of do a little bit of everything really well. And one of the reasons that we saw them was the damage contribution with Power Infusion, and World First Guilds are really good at using their personal defensives. And so Symbol of Hope will knock a minute off of everybody's personal defensives across the raid. And so this type of utility kind of took some time to gain popularity for guilds. But now that people know how to utilize it, I think it's increasingly valuable to see people use it because you can always flex double disc if a fight demands it, as they tried to do on Taros, ended up not going for it. And there's just enough ways to get around most mechanics until you get to like Razageth, for example.
Okay, so yeah, also you're saying that like that puts a responsibility on everyone to use their personals. If you're going to be resetting them, they're going to have to be using them, which can sometimes be a little hard. Sorry to all the healers out there.
Oh, yeah.
You have to cancel casts. It's hard. Yeah, you
Listen,
can't just weave it in easily all the time.
I'll even give them time beforehand and say, hey, symbol's up. Oh, another mechanic's coming in 5-10 seconds or something.
Yeah, that's what makes, like, if you have an insane raid leader or, like, a 21st man, like Liquid does, and it's all just like, all right, these people, these personals here, and you just kind of, like, fit it in.
Yeah, when we had some of our listen-ins, we were able to see they had a lot of notifications specifically for when they're supposed to use their defensives. They had tailored weak auras to make sure, hey, here's a reminder. This is where you're using your defensive at. And so when you have that coordination and you're getting multiple extra uses of your defensives as a result, it's wild.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there could be, like, an updated bigwigs kind of thing where you tailor like someone goes in like a Wowhead guide almost and just goes like, I'm just going to go put in where you should use all your defensives and such for like these different damage events. I guess it varies guild to guild, but maybe that could be standardized in some way to be like out there for the normal people. But
I think Warcraft logs could probably put something like that together because they would have the data as well for when the World First Guilds were using it for top 20, top 50, whatever.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Help get that out there. All right, so on the other side, what would make you play Disc instead of Holy? Is that just for the damage and preventing big hits versus healing up health?
A lot of times it's for when you're preparing for specific moments, and Disc is basically able to have like raid cooldown level output every minute and a half, or you can kind of weaken it a little bit and put together really powerful output at 45 seconds here, slightly less powerful output 45 seconds there. And we saw Nick on the side of Liquid doing that on a number of different fights. Sometimes he'd focus all of his output every minute and a half. Other times he'd kind of break it up a little bit. And you can prepare for the incoming damage. When you're stacked up for barrier, you get great value there. And then the passive damage is among the highest that healers are able to bring to the table.
Okay. And then, so we'll go on to Resto Druid.
Yep.
They seem kind of just like a Holy Priest in a way.
A bit, but they don't really bring as much utility. And so I think Resto Druid's output was overall pretty good before Vault of the Incarnates even dropped. But it definitely felt like the mobility benefits that they get were pretty good, but not enough to really push them above Holy Priest representation that we saw. Because the only Resto Druids on the side of Liquid we were seeing was Xevi, who also is Boomkin. So he's the flex player for them. So it wasn't like they were specifically bringing a Resto Druid main to these fights. And so when you're having a Holy Priest who are good enough to be able to sustain their output and able to get past some of the mobile mechanics like Senarth's mobility or Dathia as they're dragging everybody into the middle of the room or something along those lines, there were a lot of moments where Resto Druid was, like not a bad pick, but it wasn't bringing so much more output to outweigh the utility value of something like Symbol of Hope or Power Infusion and whatnot.
Okay. You can see it's ironic. He does not approve of this discussion.
I know, but you know what? The healers make the world go round.
Yeah, a truce between the two factions for tonight.
That's
All
right.
And then, similar to, or in my view, similar to Holy Priest and Resto Druid would be Monk, Windwalker Monk. Or not Mistweaver.
Mistweaver, yeah. Mistweaver's an odd situation this time around. I feel like it's one of those healers that should be really powerful because they bring some additional utility in Dragonflight from some of these extra like mobile passive buffs that they're bringing. They can kind of bring a healing increase from their class talents. They can get an avoidance increase, and it's all proximity based, which I think has a lot of value because you're having moments where the raid is split in half. You had it on Dathia, you had it on Broodkeeper, and so you say, well, if we want to bring one Windwalker and maybe not two, you're still maintaining those buffs even when the raid's not together.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was that situation of that's pretty good utility in these niche scenarios for these specific fights, but it's not bringing overwhelming output, and it's sort of having this additional problem of requiring melee range and requiring a lot of targets to hit without too much movement, which was also not happening. Because on Broodkeeper, you would be sort of running ads all over the place or running the boss all over the place to chase after the next set of eggs or the next ad spawn. And so they're not great at like picking up their Fey Stomp. They can kind of do it here and there, but they're not great at picking it up and moving it all of the time. Because if they get caught out, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, I think especially in dungeons too, you notice that melee healer if you're running a melee heavy dungeon comp.
And like I said, they produce a lot of healing based off damaging a large quantity of enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like it scales as well as it ought to. And that's very frustrating.
Yeah, so how does the other melee healer Paladin feel in that regard?
Well, Paladin has like the benefit in a raid of being carried by the utility.
Mm-hmm.
And it always is going to be brought because it brings passive damage reduction to the entire raid, no matter what. Just flat on its own, 3%.
3%, okay.
In addition to that, you also have the Aura Mastery, which is the best damage reduction cooldown in the game because nobody has to be stacked, nobody has to be positioned in a special way. You just got to be in range of people, which you almost always are, and everybody gets damage reduction. So it's insane what that brings. The damage is always really high. It's competing with Dispriest right now in a lot of fights for passive damage. And the output is also very focused. Like when we saw the tank nerfs right before this raid started, it was in my mind, it was like a very big Paladin buff. Because whenever tanks get obliterated, healers don't really like heal the tanks more. They just stack more Paladins in a raid group.
More beacons?
For more beacons, yeah. And so tanks are pretty stout, I would argue. I think they're still in a very strong position relative to where they were in like Shadowlands and Nathria.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think tanks are getting quite as obliterated, but they're still going to be brought no matter what, even if they're not properly able to do Razagast mechanics solo, and they're saying, hey, well, we're going to find other ways to be able to keep you on the platform a la Evokers.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah, I've heard that if you could somehow like put in the logs the amount of DR that Paladins bring, that people would be like rioting.
Oh, 100%.
Like, if it looked like the healing meter, they'd do so much work. Do you think are they the mandatory healer, a Paladin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that their output plus their utility is like insanely powerful this tier.
Okay.
It's obviously good enough that you're going to keep on bringing it to something like Razageth.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had more powerful versions of Paladin in the past, and thank goodness we're not there.
All right.
Because it's never fun to like lock in certain healers, and same thing with DPS, right? It's never fun to be forced to bring a monk or be forced to bring a demon hunter if they're not good on their own, just debuffs.
And with healers, it's so much harder because there's limited slots. You have a lot more flexibility with the DPS comp.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do we cover all the specs?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
If we
like,
forget one, I apologize.
when you're like getting into a beta fight for the first time, or like stepping into Mythic Raid for the first time, and you're just like gonna pull the boss, like, what's going through your head? Are you just like, I'm gonna spam my keys and be like super jumpy and blow all my mana, or do you kind of have like your rotation that you're gonna ease into?
For the past 5 or 6 years of beta testing, where I've been in like more serious guilds, I usually start as Holy Priest, and I'll kind of just blow my mana, blow cooldowns. The second I see damage, I'll go. And the first, you usually only have like an hour of raid testing per these beta bosses. Mm-hmm. And so right off the bat, we just make sure everybody lives. We want to see as far into the fight as we can. And then once you get a bit of familiarity with the mechanics or the timings, or you're kind of talking to the healers and saying, okay, you're going to trank this, you're going to revival that, I'll switch to disc, and I'll usually start working on a lot of my timings because obviously for the years on years, disc has always been brought to these raid fights.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I think for DPS, you kind of just like blow your load like constantly until you realize or like find a spot where you need to save it, or unless, you know, and then if there's ads, DPS are very good at remembering to save their cooldowns
they
for
will
AoE.
instantly do ZDPS on pull just to make sure they blow up the ads.
Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. And what would you say for like a key? Like as it's Tyrannical week, I don't know if you did a lot of beta keys.
Oh, yeah.
But for a lot of people out there, this is their first time getting into these Tyrannical bosses, and they might not know what to expect. Is it similar where you're just like, please let me drink before the boss because I want to like go crazy?
Well, I think it was interesting that, you know, Nick last week, obviously it was last week, but he was doing 20s with, you know, not amazing gear by any means, but the group that he was playing with also didn't have any soothes on Fortified Raging Week, and they still chested at 20 Ruby life pools because they took their time. Obviously their DPS had phenomenal gear, and so what they did was they took a lot of priority target every single time. And so, yeah, when you're in a pug group, you're not going to have the damage of Liquid Raiders, mind you, but taking that extra time and being mindful of like what you're pulling. For example, they took an extra like minute or two to skip around like Flame Gullet, because Flame Gullet will enrage on his own and then increase and ramp up in damage, and then he also deals with the raging affix on top of it. So when it comes to healing in these dungeons, definitely if you can level up your keystones or find somebody's lowest key and start with that this week, that helps a lot. I haven't been playing any disc this week, and I probably won't, because Holy is just more mana efficient, and it's more of an attrition healer in dungeons than Disc, which is very bursty and can drain their mana bar in an instant.
Oh, okay. All right, interesting. And then, so like, when you're going into, like, say you're pushing, this is, you know, you've done these keys 1,000 times, and you're like, we want to keep pushing up. Maybe we've been, you know, farming some 15s. We want to move in and start getting our 20s done. I don't know if the portals are back, but, you know, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And, like, try and, like, finish the seasons, so-called. Do you approach it like a boss fight where you just kind of lay the dungeon out and you just go, like, I'm going to put my cooldowns here. I know we're going to do a big pull here because all the DPS have their cooldowns. Or is it a lot more, like, on the fly?
I think for trash packs, I'm a lot more on the fly. Whereas whenever I enter individual boss fights, I sort of think about it in terms of like the planning that you mentioned, where I'll not only micromanage like my own cooldowns and my own defensives, my own health pot, but I'll also use Omni CD, the add-on, to make sure I'm tracking everybody else's. And so I'll take a lot of time to micromanage other people. And so if I'm a healer that is able to top everybody in an instant, there's always going to be drawbacks. For Discipline, you can top everybody quickly, but it costs a lot of mana. For Holy, you can top people quickly, but it costs cooldowns. For Evoker, it can cost resources, it can cost damage uptime. There's always cost-benefit analysis. And so the best way when you get into a lot of these tyrannical encounters is to get everybody in voice and actually work through micromanaging defensives and health bars. Thankfully, there's a lot of boss fights that are not too random in the damage, and so you always know what to expect more or less all the time. You know, Ruby Life Pool is a very tough dungeon, but on the first boss, you know that the damage is going to be kind of the same across the board for the ice tornadoes, for the ice traps that are dropping, for the shield. It's very even damage across the board. And so with that, you're able to plan a lot of defensives around who has some, or plan healing around the defensives available, and then your own mana, your own cooldowns, depending on what type of healer you're playing.
Okay. How do you feel about healers having interrupts? I think most of them have just priest, right? The only one? Sorry to bring that up.
Yeah. It's just Holy and Disc that don't have interrupts.
Yeah.
I really only want like a 45-second or like a 1-minute interrupt or something, so that when I'm going out in the open world, I don't have to switch to Shadow to kill a rare mob that channels this massive heal or something. But
I wasn't even thinking of solo content. Yeah, that is rough.
But there's also areas in dungeons too. You know, obviously I know Brackenhide's not in our Season 1 pool, but that dungeon, you would have the Scourge Masters or whatever that would cast that Fear Bomb. Mm-hmm. And just being a healer and watching a cast go off that is on an elite mob that you can't fear, stun, or whatever, and you must use a kick, and you don't have access to one, it's just despair.
Yeah. Have you ever thought of playing with a heart rate monitor on?
I have one on my watch, but
like on your stream, and they can
yeah.
see
But like the problem with being a healer is sometimes you have to like bite your lip and like not be mean to people, not like visualize that you're very upset with them. And I feel like people could just use that when I'm like biting my lip, and they could just see the heart rate going up and up and up and up and up as I just bite my lip and continue healing people.
Yeah,
maybe I'll try it sometime.
Yeah, I don't like how like a lot of. I feel like DPS is more chill.
Yeah,
it's just like you're kind of just in the zone blasting, and you're doing
they're like,
your own
why did I
thing.
die?
Yeah,
what happened? I have no idea.
If you mess up, you die. You know, that's it. If you you rarely don't make DPS checks. Like progression rating is pretty much where it happens, but like the average player is not missing tons of DPS checks, but the average healer is seeing people die constantly. So like, how do you deal with like, even if it's not your fault, you're still the person who's supposed to not let people die. So
yeah.
How do you not let that affect you?
I mean, that's always a challenge, right? Because when it's on you, especially in a 5-man environment, you want to make sure it's a group-wide concerted effort. Mm-hmm. And I think it's always important for everybody, regardless of what role you're playing, to be good at your short-term memory, but also not let it affect you long-term. Being able to recollect why people die, whether it's their own lack of defensive usage, whether they stood in something, or whether you just didn't heal them, is always really important to be able to break down why. I like using the details death meters. I like using Omni CD to track those things. I obviously stream and record myself, so I'm able to watch those things back. And I've had times where I go back and check the VOD, or in raids, I go check Warcraft logs. So I can identify those things and see what I can do better, what the other person can do better. Sometimes healers are handed a tough job because their damage is low, and so you have to stretch yourself even more. Sometimes healers are worried about the wrong things, the wrong debuffs, the wrong mechanics, and then they're sacrificing their healing to do it. And so it's tough not to take those things personally, because that is a performance metric for your job. Mm-hmm. But I think having a good short-term memory and then not carrying it along with you long-term is always important.
Yeah, good advice. I think I heard, forgetting his name, he's the guy who's doing like the stretches and stuff with the guys.
Tim Horton.
He gave him like a note. He was like, if you make a mistake, give
Tanner.
yourself like, Tanner. He's like, give yourself 30 seconds and then gone.
Yeah.
Like just kind of think about it, get annoyed at yourself, whatever, and then just let it go away. Mm-hmm. So yeah, good advice for everyone. And like you said, helps with DPS too. The reviewing VODs, even if it's weird, like sometimes you'll watch yourself play and you're like, why am I moving around so much?
Yeah.
Like I should just be standing there. What am I doing? And so, or like, oh, I didn't even notice that thing's just been sitting on off cooldown for like 2 minutes and I could have used it. So yeah, great advice. Watch your VODs. So it can be a little weird or boring, but if you really want to improve, it's a good way.
And I think that's part of what makes a lot of the Liquid Raiders and the Echo Raiders and everything such great players as a whole, is they're always looking to find ways to improve themselves. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of embracing those boring things, like you mentioned, that are not super flashy. They're not always going out of their way and just engaging in all the fun, cool things all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, the Echo Squad, for example, has won all of the MDIs for years and years, or the most MDIs we've ever seen. There's been a couple who have taken the crown here and there. Mm-hmm. But they spend so much time practicing and grinding through dungeons to perfect the routes, to perfect the crowd control, to perfect how they use defensives. And there's a lot of that not flashy, not glittery work that goes into improving as a player that is then able to be put on display in areas like this for the World First race. Yeah,
I would spend an insane amount of time, even on farm, just comparing my logs to other parses, other people in the guild. I mean, like one of the best ways to get better is to play with people who are better than you, and then you can be like, why is this guy like destroying me? And then you can just, we both did the exact same fight. You can just compare your casts and everything and just get so much info.
Yeah.
So yeah, just like extend that comfort zone a little bit.
I think absolutely the best way to be able to improve is to be around people who are better, but also to take time to teach. Because, when we're in grade school, they're always saying, well, if you can teach it, you can understand it. You're going to ace the test, no problem. And so being able to, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned DPS players see things through a very different lens. It's like we have different prescription glasses. You got glasses, I got contacts. And I think that's so true when it comes to a dungeon environment in particular, because DPS players won't see what the healers are seeing. And so finding an environment where the one I have for my 5-man group I like a lot, because I can micromanage defensives. I can micromanage cooldowns when we're first going through the mechanics and how things are working. And then over time, when I competed in the MDI with my squad, everyone picked it up and understood what they needed to get done, and you could see that improvement come across the team as a whole. So I still had a lot to learn for the competition environment, and then I'm able to teach my point of view from using defensives.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions I've got for you. Thank you so much for letting me ask you these.
Anytime.
Very great answers.
Yeah. We could talk about this for hours.
We could, but it is getting late.
Yep.
And we've got more show tomorrow, more Razagath.
Oh, that's right. I can't wait.
A lot more phase 1, I'm afraid. But they're getting into that intermission, and, who knows what Blizzard's going to be up to behind the scenes. So, thanks for everyone for joining. Don't forget about our charity. Oh, I hear there's a gift or something coming in.
Ooh.
Oh, is that my favorite monster, the Zero Ultra White one?
Love that.
Oh, look at that.
Is it your birthday?
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's Phi's birthday as well,
Yeah.
isn't it? Happy birthday, Phi. He's one of our producers.
I'm going to blow. Can I blow this candle out?
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kams and Phi. Happy birthday to you.
Too kind.
Hey.
Too kind.
Love that.
Well, thank you, production. I'm going to take this home. All right, and if you've been donating, thank you. Ocean Conservancy, tl.gg/rwf-donate.
Love them.
Yep, and this apparel I'm wearing here, Team Liquid Race to World First.
Ooh.
tl.gg/rwf shop.
Yep.
And then tl.gg/shop for the winter collection it just released. We got some of that. I think you might be wearing this.
The
a little
winter collection, you say?
Yeah, priest color.
Yep. I mean, you got to be decked out in white.
Yeah.
I don't know how well the horse is going to be able to show. Is it like the stallion that you have?
The blue's popping it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that.
There we go. Hey, that works.
Beautiful.
Well.
Yeah, so go check that out. Thank you to Monster Energy for sponsoring the show. Thank you again, Jack.
Anytime.
And we'll see you guys 10 a.m. PST, Rise and Raid with Preheat. Thank you. Have a good night.